Your presence ruins the holiday mood, Alana. My father spat that after I paid $12,000 for his vanity. My mother called me scruffy. Fine. If I'm too ugly for the light, you can rot in the dark. No party, no mercy. I'm taking my breath back. The echoes of their betrayal are louder than the mechanical scream of the shipyard, fueling a cold, calculated fire in my veins as I climb into the cockpit to face the abyss. My knuckles are white, gripped tight around the cold steel levers of the container crane. 100 feet below me, the black water of Lake Michigan churns in the freezing wind, a restless mirror of the storm building in my chest. I've been in this cabin for 16 hours, moving massive blocks of metal with the precision of a surgeon, while the rest of Chicago prepares for a silent night. On the small radio beside me, a muffled choir sings about joy and peace. But up here, the only sound is the rhythmic groan of the winch and the howl of the wind through the girders. I'm not here because I crave the overtime. I'm here because love, at least in the Henderson family, is a verb that requires constant funding. My muscles ache with a deep, throbbing exhaustion that coffee can no longer touch. But I view this labor as a silent prayer, a testament to the commitment I made to keep my parents comfortable. I've always believed that the true height of a person is measured by how they treat those who can do nothing for them. Looking back now, I should have seen that my family was treating me the same way I treat these shipping containers, as an object meant to carry a heavy load, moved around at their convenience, and never once asked how it felt to be hollow inside. I paused the crane for a moment to take a sip of lukewarm coffee. Through the glass, I saw old Pete, a dock worker who had been at this port longer than I've been alive, shivering as he secured a key line. I lowered a thermos of hot broth I'd kept for myself, signaling him to take it. He looked up, his eyes weary but grateful, and offered a shaky thumbs up. It reminded me that dignity isn't found in a title, but in the quality of one's presence. I didn't realize it then, but that small moment of shared warmth would be the last bit of grace I'd experience before stepping into the cold light of the Blackstone. Suddenly, my phone pings. A final authorization request from the bank. With a grease-stained gloved finger, I tap the screen to confirm the $12,000 wire transfer to the Blackstone Hotel. That's 2 years of missed vacations and extra shifts, gone in a single digital heartbeat. It's the price of a perfect family image, a ticket for my parents to play royalty for a night. I paid it willingly, believing that if I provided the stage, maybe, just maybe, they would finally invite me to stand on it. The scene shifts with a jarring, crystalline snap. One moment I am surrounded by the gray, oily mist of the port. The next, I am standing in the service entrance of the Blackstone, hearing the distant, golden chime of crystal against crystal. My father, Drew, and my mother, Diane, are likely moving through the ballroom right now, their laughter ringing out over champagne that costs more than my weekly groceries. I ran a hand through my windswept hair, feeling the grit of the dock still clinging to me. My phone buzzes again. It's a text from Diane. I don't even have to open it to feel the sting. The appetizers are late. If you're coming, don't bring that stench of diesel into this room. Dress like you belong to us for once. The words cut deeper than the Chicago frost. I stayed stoic, leaning my head against the cold brick wall of the hallway. I've spent my life trying to bridge the gap between their expectations and my reality. Have you ever devoted yourself to people who don't even want to touch your hand? It's a heavy thing to realize that you haven't been forgotten. You've been erased. I walked past a mirrored pillar in the service corridor, catching a glimpse of the scruffy girl looking back. My brother Lyle and my sister Casey are out there right now, flaunting a success built on my exhaustion. I can see the cracks in their facade from a mile away. The rented jewelry, the forced toothy smiles. A house built on lies doesn't need a storm to fall. It only needs the truth to stop holding up the walls. And I have been the truth holding up their walls for far too long. I took a deep breath, smoothing down my work parka. I didn't come here to be celebrated. I came to ensure the event I bought with my blood and sweat was executed perfectly. It was my final act of filial grace, a way to say I love them without needing the words they never gave me. I stepped out of the shadows and toward the grand hallway, my boots thudding softly on the plush carpet. Michigan Avenue was a blur of holiday lights when I finally stood before the heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom. I felt the $12,000 receipt in my pocket, a folded piece of paper that felt heavier than a lead brick. I checked in with the catering lead, a young man who looked as exhausted as I felt. I spoke to him with the respect I wished my own father would show me, reminding him that his work mattered. Dignity isn't a gift others give you. It's a standard you set for yourself. I spotted Drew near the entrance, looking every bit the Chicago patriarch in his tailored tuxedo. I approached him, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wanted a hug. I wanted a Merry Christmas, Alana. I wanted to feel like I mattered, but as I reached for his hand, his eyes swept over my work clothes with a casual, devastating coldness. He didn't see the daughter who had worked 80 hours a week to pay for this night. He saw a smudge on his polished reality. He recoiled from my touch as if I were a plague, his lip curling in a sneer that made my stomach turn. He stepped closer, his voice a low, toxic whisper that hissed through the festive music. Your presence ruins the holiday mood, Alana. Look at you. You're a mess. My guests are people of status, and you look like you crawled out of a gutter. I stood frozen, not from the Chicago wind, but from the sudden, chilling realization that my father's love was a bill I could no longer afford to pay. The neon lights of Chicago blurred through the taxi window as I fled the Blackstone Hotel, my father's cruel words still ringing in my ears like a physical blow. I retreated to my small loft, a space I'd kept sparse and functional, a stark contrast to the bloated luxury I had just funded. I collapsed onto my sofa, the silence of the room pressing against my eardrums. My mind, fractured by exhaustion and betrayal, drifted back to a rainy Tuesday only a month ago. I had just walked through the door after an 18-hour emergency shift at the port, my bones aching and my vision swimming with fatigue. Drew had been waiting for me in the kitchen, a stack of papers and a warm pen already laid out on the mahogany table. He had looked at me with such feigned concern, his voice smooth and paternal as he spoke of municipal authorizations for the house's heating system. Just some routine maintenance signatures, Alana, he'd said, sliding the documents toward me. Go get some sleep, honey. I'll handle the rest. I trusted him because he was my father. I was too tired to read the fine print, too drained to question the man who had raised me. I signed my name with a hand that barely stopped shaking. Looking back now, I should have seen the predatory precision in his eyes. It is a profound tragedy when the people you protect become the predators you need protection from. That was the night the foundation of my life was quietly dismantled. In the cold clarity of the present, I opened my laptop and pulled up the digital county records I had bookmarked earlier that week after a strange call from the utility company. My heart stopped. It wasn't a maintenance authorization. It was a quitclaim deed. I had unknowingly signed over the title of the family home, the house I had spent 7 years paying for, directly to my brother, Lyle. The legal reality hit me like a wave of ice water. Under U.S. property law, that signature was a binding gift. I hadn't just been pushed out of a party. I'd been robbed of my legacy while I was too tired to defend it. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted with your whole heart? I stood up, my legs feeling like lead, and walked to the small wall safe tucked behind a framed photo of the Chicago skyline. I needed to see the one thing that still connected me to a version of family that was honest. I keyed in the code and pulled the heavy door open, reaching for the velvet box that held my grandfather's gold pocket watch. The box felt light, empty. In its place was a small rectangular slip of yellow paper, a pawn ticket from a shop on the north side. My breath hitched. Drew hadn't just stolen my future, he had sold my past. I didn't wait. I drove to the Henderson estate, the suburban silence feeling like a shroud. I found Drew in his study, surrounded by the scent of expensive cigars and old leather. I dropped the pawn ticket on his desk, my voice a quiet, dangerous whisper. He didn't even look up at first. When he did, there was no shame. Only the familiar, casual arrogance. He justified it with the ease of a man who had long ago traded his soul for an image. The dead don't need time, Alana, he said, flicking ash into a crystal tray. But the living need respect. I needed that cash to ensure the limousine was paid for tonight. We had to look the part. I stared at him, realizing that a man who sells his father's legacy to rent a stranger's car hasn't found respect. He has only found a louder way to be empty. Then came the second blow, the one that made the room tilt. He mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that Lyle had already used the house title as collateral for a high-interest bridge loan. My brother had literally gambled our home to fund a yacht rental for a New Year's party he couldn't afford. They were burning my life's work to fuel a single night of vanity. Would you walk away or play along to survive? My kindness had been treated as a weakness for far too long. I left the study without another word. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I sat in my car in the driveway of the house that was no longer mine and opened my banking app. The $12,000 Blackstone bill was still marked as pending. I watched the cursor blink, realizing that I was the invisible foundation of their entire existence. I looked at a faded photo of my grandfather in my visor. "I will get it back, Grandpa," I whispered. "Not for the gold, but for the truth." I realized then that I wasn't just a daughter being excluded. I was a creditor about to call in a debt. I could hear Lyle's boisterous laughter echoing from the living room, bragging to some friend on the phone about his new property and the big moves he was making. He sounded so confident, so entitled to the fruits of my labor. I looked at my phone, my thumb hovering over the report fraud/cancel service button for the hotel contract. It's a strange thing to realize that the people you are willing to die for are the very ones who have been killing you all along. I felt a cold, calculated rhythm take over my heart. The high-stakes game they started was about to enter a new phase. I didn't realize it then, but that moment of absolute betrayal was the spark of my liberation. I haven't been forgotten. I've been erased. And now, I was ready to return the favor. I started a mental audit of every utility bill, every insurance premium, and every recurring payment that bore my name. I was the oxygen in their room, and I was about to stop breathing for them. I pulled out of the driveway, the tires crunching on the snow, knowing exactly what I had to do next. The chill of the Chicago night seemed to follow me even into the opulent halls of the Blackstone Hotel. I found myself standing in the dim, narrow service corridor, a place reserved for those who do the heavy lifting while the elite drink to their own reflections. I had come to find Drew, to confront him about the pawn ticket that felt like a burning ember in my pocket. But as I reached the heavy mahogany door of the private Henderson suite, the sound of muffled voices stopped me cold. It wasn't the festive cheer I expected. It was the desperate, hushed tone of men negotiating on the edge of a cliff. I pressed my ear to the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. Through the wood, I heard Lyle sobbing, a pathetic, wet sound. He was admitting that the investment he made with the equity of the house I bought had vanished into a fraudulent crypto scheme. Then came a voice like dry ice, one I recognized instantly. Mr. Sterling. He was a debt collector who moved in circles where the law was often an afterthought. He demanded immediate repayment of a $50,000 loan, or he would seize the very assets of this party, publicly and tonight. The air in the corridor felt like it was being sucked out of the room. I waited for Drew to defend our home, to protect his youngest daughter's sweat and blood. Instead, his voice came through with a merchant's coldness. He proposed a partnership. He suggested introducing Alana, with her clean credit and six-figure engineering salary, to Sterling's firm as a permanent consultant. It was a thinly veiled offer of indentured servitude to guarantee Lyle's debt. Looking back now, I should have seen it coming. Some people don't want a family. They want a safety net made of someone else's skin. I stood paralyzed, my hand resting on the cold floral wallpaper, realizing my own father was weighing my soul against a debt I didn't create. Inside, the cruelty only deepened. I heard Lyle agree with a sickening enthusiasm. "Alana won't mind," he chirped. "She's used to working hard for nothing anyway." Drew added that he would frame it as a promotion for me, using my own loyalty as the bait for their trap. My grandfather once whispered to me that character is what you are in the dark, while reputation is just the shadow others see. My family had traded their character for a shadow, and now that shadow was disappearing into the night. I wasn't angry. I was profoundly, surgically detached. A sudden clatter nearby made me jump. A young hotel maid was struggling with a heavy tray of silverware, her face etched with the same exhaustion I felt every morning at the docks. Despite the world crumbling behind that mahogany door, I reached out and steadied her tray. I gave her a small, genuine smile. "Don't let them make you feel small," I whispered to her. "You are the one keeping this place standing." She looked at me with a spark of recognition, A brief moment of shared humanity in a house built on lies. Sometimes, the person who saves you is the one you choose to help. The clink of glasses from inside signaled that the deal was sealed. They had sold my future to pay for Lyle's vanity. This was the moment my stoic endurance finally transformed into decisive action. I realized I was no longer a daughter waiting for a seat at the table. I was a creditor who was about to call in every single debt. I didn't burst in. I didn't scream. I simply turned and walked away, my boots silent on the plush carpet. I didn't realize it then, but that silence hurt more than any words ever could. I slipped into a quiet alcove near the service elevator and pulled out my phone. I dialed my lawyer friend at the Port Authority. I needed to confirm the legal boundaries of the ground I was about to scorch. He confirmed what I already knew. The Blackstone contract, the utility accounts, the insurance, they were all in my name, paid by my personal accounts. Under U.S. law, I had the absolute right to terminate them without Drew's consent. I looked at my reflection in the elevator's brass doors. I was still the scruffy daughter, but now I was the one holding the keys. I moved toward the grand ballroom where the lights were at their peak. It is better to walk alone in the truth than to sit at a table built on a foundation of betrayal. As I entered, I caught Diane's eye from across the room. She adjusted her pearls and sneered at my attire, her gaze flicking away as if I were a smudge on a masterpiece. I didn't flinch. I simply nodded to her, a ghost of a smile playing on my lips. Enjoy the light while it lasts, Mother. It's the most expensive thing you'll ever lose. I watched Lyle laughing near the champagne fountain, oblivious to the fact that his safety net had just turned into a ghost. I realized that my silence wasn't a sign of weakness, but a sign of finality. What would you have done in my shoes? I wasn't just leaving a party. I was withdrawing the oxygen from their room. I turned my gaze back to my phone, my thumb hovering over the final cancellation command. The music continued to play, but for me, the silence had already begun. The grand mahogany doors of the Blackstone ballroom didn't just open. They felt like the jaws of a gilded trap. As I stepped from the dim utilitarian service hallway into the foyer, the transition was so violent it made my head spin. One moment I was in a world of cinder blocks and diesel fumes. The next I was drowning in the cloying scent of $500 perfumes and expensive lilies. The gold leaf ceilings and crystal chandeliers reflected a light so bright it felt predatory, exposing every speck of dust on my work parka. I looked down at my hands. My knuckles were still stained with the grease of the Port of Chicago, and I felt like a ghost haunting a palace I had paid for with my own life force. I stood there, a solitary figure of industrial grit against a backdrop of Chicago's elite. I watched them laugh, their teeth white and perfect as they leaned over the $12,000 banquet spread I had authorized with a single tap of my thumb. It was a strange, hollow sensation. My grandfather used to tell me that a diamond doesn't stop being a diamond just because it's covered in dust, but a piece of glass will never be a jewel, no matter how much you polish it. Looking around this room, I realized I was surrounded by polished glass. They shimmered under the lights, but they lacked the internal fire of someone who had actually built something. I haven't just been excluded, I've been erased from the very value I created. As I began to move through the foyer, an elderly woman in a shimmering navy gown stumbled slightly, her silver evening bag slipping from her fingers and clattering onto the marble floor. I saw my brother, Lyle, and my sister Casey standing just a few feet away, sipping champagne and laughing at a joke. They looked right at the woman, saw her struggle, and then turned their backs, continuing their conversation as if she were invisible. The lack of basic human decency in that moment hit me harder than the cold wind outside. I stepped forward, my heavy work boots thudding softly against the marble, and knelt to retrieve the bag for her. I handed it back with a gentle smile, noticing her hands were trembling. "Are you all right, ma'am?" I asked softly. She looked at me, her eyes widening as she took in my windswept hair and oil-stained jacket. But then, she saw my eyes. She squeezed my hand, her voice a fragile whisper. "Thank you, dear. You have a kind soul." I realized then that true elegance is the beauty that never fades, kindness. I might be scruffy in dress, but I was immaculate in spirit, and that was a wealth they could never steal. Looking back now, I should have seen that moment as the final confirmation of our differences. but the warmth of that interaction was short-lived. Across the room, near a towering ice sculpture, I spotted Mr. Sterling. He was watching me with the focused, predatory gaze of a hawk. He wasn't looking at a guest. He was looking at an asset. I remembered the conversation I'd overheard behind the mahogany door. The deal was set. I was the lamb being led to the slaughter to pay for Lyle's fraudulent crypto dreams. The trap wasn't just in the room. The trap was the room. Every light, every flower, every note of the orchestra was a link in the chain they were trying to wrap around my future. I didn't get more than 10 feet into the ballroom before Drew and Diane intercepted me. They didn't move like parents welcoming a child. They moved like security guards removing a trespasser. Drew's face was a mask of casual, practiced disgust. He didn't ask about my shift or why my hands were raw. He only saw the smudge on his perfect evening. He stepped into my personal space, his presence looming and toxic, and he spoke in a low hiss that was meant to dismantle me. "Your presence ruins the holiday mood, Alana," he said, the words dripping with a cold, calculated venom. "Look at you! You're a mess! My guests are people of status, and you look like you crawled out of a gutter." I stood there, my heart hammering a rhythmic, mechanical beat in my chest. I looked at Diane, hoping for a flicker of maternal instinct, but her sneer was even sharper than his. She pulled a $20 bill from her clutch and thrust it toward my chest, the paper crinkling under her manicured thumb. "You look too scruffy for a Henderson," she whispered, her eyes darting around to ensure no one was watching. "Take this. Go out the back entrance and find a diner. Don't let anyone see you. You're embarrassing us." I looked at that $20 bill, then thought of the $12,000 currently pending on my credit card. Money that was providing the very air they were breathing. Mercy to the ungrateful is like pouring water into a sieve. I realized in that moment that they didn't actually hate my appearance. They hated the reality of me. They hated the reminder of the hard work and the diesel fumes that funded their lazy, parasitic lives. My scruffiness was a mirror they couldn't stand to look into because it showed them exactly who they were. Thieves dressed in silk. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I felt a cold, crystalline focus take over my mind. I understood that the most dangerous person is the one who no longer needs your approval. I didn't know what was waiting for me next, but I knew I was done playing the victim. I didn't argue. I didn't plead for my seat at the table. I simply nodded, my voice coming out as calm and steady as a frozen lake in mid-January. "I understand," I said, my gaze meeting Drew's until he was the one who looked away. "If my presence ruins the party, then it's only right that I take it elsewhere." I turned on my heel, the heavy soles of my boots echoing with a finality that made the nearest guests pause. I walked back towards the service exit, my hand already sliding into my parka pocket to grip my phone. Under U.S. contract law, specifically the terms I had meticulously reviewed before signing the Blackstone agreement, I was the sole authorized payer. I was the one who had cleared the security protocols. I was the one whose credit was on the line. I opened the hotel's client portal on my phone as I pushed through the service doors. My thumb hovered over the screen. I initiated a service cancellation for unforeseen circumstances and a full refund request for the pending $12,000. I cited a failure of the guest to adhere to the conduct standards I had established as the financier. I wasn't taking revenge. I was simply stopping the fuel. You cannot expect the sun to shine on you while you are trying to blow it out. I was being a responsible steward of my own life. If they wanted to play the part of the elite, they could do it on their own dime. Except I knew they didn't have a dime to their names. I felt a surge of quiet power as the cancellation confirmed message flashed on the screen. It was the moment I realized that I had finally withdrawn the oxygen from their room. I stepped out into the Chicago snow, the heavy hotel doors closing behind me with a hollow, final thud. The silence of the street was a relief compared to the noise of their lies. I reached the sidewalk and looked at my watch, or rather, the empty space on my wrist where my grandfather's watch should have been. The pawn ticket in my pocket felt like a promise. I looked back at the hotel's golden windows, the warm light spilling out onto the Michigan Avenue snow. I knew that in exactly 60 seconds, the hotel's automated system would process the cancellation. The banquets would be cleared, the band would be dismissed, and the lights, the beautiful, expensive lights I had paid for, would finally stop shining for them. I didn't feel like a bad daughter. I felt like a free woman. That's where it all started. The Chicago wind bit through my thin sweater, but the chill inside the Blackstone Hotel was far more lethal. I stood on the sidewalk, my boots crunching on the fresh powder of Michigan Avenue, watching the golden glow of the ballroom windows. I checked my phone. The countdown was over. In that split second, the hotel's automated financial gateway processed my unauthorized transaction report and the subsequent service cancellation. I didn't feel like a villain. I felt like a woman who had finally stopped paying for her own execution. When you build a palace with bricks stolen from someone else's foundation, you shouldn't be surprised when the roof falls in. Inside the ballroom, the disaster unfolded with the rhythmic precision of a falling guillotine. Drew was mid-toast, standing on the podium with a crystal flute of vintage champagne held high. He was waxing poetic about Henderson family values and unshakable prosperity, his voice booming with a confidence he hadn't earned. Suddenly, the massive chandeliers flickered once, twice, and then plunged the entire room into a tomb-like darkness. The music from the live jazz band died mid-note, leaving a hollow, ringing silence that was more terrifying than any scream. The only light remaining came from the red, haunting glow of the emergency exit signs. I watched from the street as the hotel's silhouette changed. It was a visual representation of the truth finally catching up to a lie. The elite guests, the very people my father was trying to impress to save Lyle's failing reputation, were left standing in a dark void. I realized that the truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. It just needs the lies to stop. I wasn't joyful, but I felt a profound sense of peace. I had been the oxygen in that room for decades, and by simply stepping out, I had shown them exactly how much they depended on the daughter they called Scruffy. The darkness wasn't the only strike. I saw the silhouette of the Blackstone's general manager, followed by two stern-looking security guards, entering the ballroom with glowing tablets. He didn't whisper. He informed Drew and the gathered VIPs in a voice that carried through the stunned silence that the primary credit card holder, Alana Henderson, had reported the entire event's funding as unauthorized. He announced that all services, including the open bar and the catering, were formally terminated effective immediately. The mask of Henderson prosperity didn't just slip, it shattered into a million jagged pieces on that marble floor. Despite the chaos I had triggered, I didn't want the innocent to suffer for my family's sins. I pulled up my banking app and authorized a separate, smaller payment directly to the catering staff's union fund from my personal savings. I wanted to ensure the dishwashers and the servers, the people who actually work for their bread, got their night's pay. My kindness has always been directed at those who earn it, not those who demand it as a birthright. Have you ever lived something like this, where you realize that your true family isn't the one you share blood with, but the people who stand in the trenches with you? Then came the moment that would haunt the Henderson name for generations. In the pitch-black ballroom, Diane lost her carefully cultivated mask of refinement. She began to shriek in a blind, narcissistic panic, her voice high and shrill. Drew tried to hush her, but the sound system, still powered by a separate emergency battery loop for fire safety, was still live. The hot mic on the podium picked up every toxic word and broadcasted it with crystalline clarity to every socialite and investor in the room. "I told you that scruffy little brat was a mistake!" Diane screamed at my father, her words echoing through the dark sun. "We should have left her at that orphanage the day we brought her home to be Lyle's shadow. She's ruined everything. She was supposed to be our meal ticket, not our judge." The silence that followed her outburst was absolute. The truth of my adoption and my status as a glorified family servant was no longer a hidden bruise. It was a public execution. I listened to the audio through the hotel's public event livestream on my phone, my eyes welling with tears I refused to let fall. A wound that stays hidden can never heal, but a wound exposed to the air is the first step toward recovery. I whispered a quiet prayer for the old Diane, the mother I had spent 30 years trying to invent in my mind. I realized that forgiveness isn't about letting the other person off the hook. It's about not letting their poison live in your heart anymore. My suitcase of memories felt lighter as I realized I was finally free from the burden of trying to be enough for people who chose to be empty. Looking back now, I should have seen that their hatred was never about me. It was about their own fear of being seen for what they truly were. The mass exodus began. I saw the guests, the status people my father worshipped, scrambling for the exits like rats from a sinking ship. None of them offered to help. None of them offered to pay the bill. They didn't want to be associated with a family exposed as both bankrupt and bigoted. I saw Mr. Sterling, the debt collector, approach Drew in the dim light of a security flashlight. He didn't look like a partner anymore. He looked like a predator that had just realized his prey was trapped. The deal for my future was dead, and Drew was left holding the bag for Lyle's $50,000 failure. The general manager cornered Drew and Lyle near the ice sculpture, which was now beginning to melt and drip like a weeping ghost. He informed them that since the contract was under my name and had been canceled by me, they were now personally liable for the damages and unpaid consumption incurred during the first hour. Without my credit to shield them, they were effectively penniless in the middle of a $12,000 disaster. They were being held accountable by the very system they tried to use against me. It's a strange thing to realize that walking away is sometimes the loudest thing you can do. I walked away from the Blackstone, my silhouette disappearing into the Chicago fog. I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. Not just the financial burden, but the suffocating need for their approval. I had spent my life as the invisible foundation, and now I was going to be the architect of my own destiny. I didn't realize it then, but that moment of public collapse was the beginning of my restoration. I had lost a house and a family, but I had finally found Alana. As I rounded the corner toward the CTA station, I saw a news van from a local Chicago station pulling up to the hotel. The Henderson scandal was going to be the talk of the city by morning. Just as I reached the turnstile, my phone vibrated with an automated security alert from my bank. Attempted large withdrawal from Lyle Henderson. Security code required! He was trying to drain my emergency savings even as he stood in the wreckage of his own making. I didn't even hesitate. I smiled, a cold and certain thing, and tapped deny. I stood on the quiet train platform, the cold air misting my breath, watching the red taillights of the L train approach. I thought of the $20 bill Diane had shoved at me, calling me scruffy. I still had it in my pocket. It wouldn't even cover the cost of my train fare and a coffee, but it was the only thing I had left of them, and that was enough. By 4 o'clock on Christmas morning, a cold blue dawn began to bleed over the suburban horizon. I sat in my car, parked a block away from the Henderson estate, watching the street lamps flicker out. The cinematic stillness of the neighborhood was broken only by the arrival of a battered yellow cab. Drew and Diane stepped out, still clutching the remnants of their pride along with their stained tuxedos and silk gowns. They looked like ghosts of a bygone era. They approached the front door, expecting the warmth of a sanctuary I had provided for years, only to stop dead in their tracks. A bright orange notice of seizure was taped firmly over the lock, glowing like a brand under the morning sky. The legal dominoes had fallen exactly as my lawyer friend predicted, because Lyle had used the fraudulent gift deed as collateral for a predatory bridge loan, and because I had cut off the interest-only payments I never authorized, the lender had moved with ruthless efficiency. Under Illinois law, an accelerated foreclosure meant the locks were changed before the sun even rose. Watching them stand there in the snow, I realized you cannot live in a house built on someone else's broken back and expect the walls to stay standing when that person finally stands up. They treated this house as a gold mine, never realizing I was the only thing keeping the mine from collapsing. Even as I watched their world dissolve into the frost, I couldn't let them freeze. I am Alana, and I am not them. I had already prepaid a week at a modest heated motel near Highway 53. I left the address and the key card with the foreman in charge of the seizure. I will not let you freeze, because my humanity isn't tied to your behavior. But I will no longer pay for your palace while you spit on my service. Looking back now, I should have seen that this was the only way they would ever truly understand the cost of their choices. The silence of the morning was suddenly shattered by the sharp, rhythmic crunch of tires on snow. 2 Chicago PD cruisers pulled into the driveway, their lights reflecting off the iced-over windows of the house. Drew's face lit up with a momentary, delusional hope. Perhaps he thought they were here to help him reclaim his property. But the officers didn't look at the house. They looked at Lyle. My friend from the Port Authority had been thorough. The official report for identity theft and felony forgery regarding the deed signed under duress had been processed with high-stakes urgency. The officers moved with a mechanical, professional detachment. They informed Lyle that the deed he coerced from me was a felony-level document fraud. As the handcuffs clicked into place, the sound echoed in the quiet morning air, a sharp, metallic period at the end of his life of parasitism. I stepped out of my car, my face calm and unshakable. Lyle's eyes met mine, filled with a desperate, ugly rage, but I didn't flinch. Character is like a tree, and reputation like its shadow. You spent your life chasing the shadow, Lyle, and now the tree has rotted away. I didn't realize it then, but that metallic click was the most honest sound I had heard in years. Drew tried to intervene, his voice rising in a pathetic, shaky attempt to use his status to stop the inevitable. The officer simply asked for his ID, informing him that he was also under investigation for complicity in the fraud. I felt a profound sense of balance being restored to the world. Mercy without justice is just an invitation for more abuse. Watching my brother being led to the cruiser wasn't about revenge. It was about the simple, cold truth of accountability. For a brief second, I felt a pang of sadness for the brother I wished I had, but I quickly realized that grief was for a person who never existed. The final confrontation happened at the edge of the driveway. Diane looked at me with a mix of visceral hatred and a terrifying, hungry expectation. Drew begged me to drop the nonsense and fix this for the sake of the family. I looked at them, my voice as firm as the frozen lake. Family is a circle of protection, not a hunting ground, I said, my words clear and unwavering. You stopped being my family the moment you put a price tag on my soul. I handed them the final envelope containing the motel key and enough cash for food, but nothing for their vanity. I informed them that I had filed for a legal order of protection and a total financial severance. I am no longer the youngest daughter to be used as a resource. I am a stranger who owes them nothing but the truth. I don't wish you pain. I wish you the courage to finally grow up. A person who never faces the consequences of their actions will never know the value of their own life. Sometimes, closure doesn't come from them. It comes from you. That's where it all ended. I didn't know what was waiting for me next, but I knew I wouldn't be the one shivering this winter. I drove away, watching Lyle's police car disappear in my rearview mirror. The $20 bill Diane gave me was still crumpled in my center console. I stopped at a small pawn shop on the way out of town, my eyes fixed on the neon sign flickering in the window. I had one more debt to collect. Not for me, but for the man who actually loved me. Ever lost everything? Just to find yourself again? I pulled into the lot, the tires crunching on the fresh snow, ready to reclaim the only piece of time that actually mattered. The dusty, cramped interior of the North Side pawn shop felt like a sanctuary of forgotten stories. I walked in, the cold Chicago air still clinging to my coat, and presented the yellow ticket I'd reclaimed from Drew's study. The shopkeeper, a man whose face was as lined as a topographical map, looked at the ticket and then at me. My bank account was finally heavy with the $12,000 refund from the Blackstone, but I didn't feel rich until he placed the gold pocket watch into my open palm. It was the only piece of my grandfather I had left. Legacy isn't something you inherit in a will, it's something you defend with your actions. I brushed a speck of lint from the engraved casing, feeling the steady, rhythmic tick against my thumb. It was a heart that had never lied to me. I stood there for a long moment, the silence of the shop wrapping around me like a blanket. I reflected on my father's desperate attempt to sell this history for a few hours in a rented limousine. It made me realize that some people know the price of everything and the value of nothing. My grandfather's voice echoed in my mind, a warm memory from a childhood that felt like it belonged to a different person. He used to say that the only time worth keeping is the time you spend being true to yourself. I realized then that I wasn't just Chuok Lai, a piece of jewelry. I was Chuok Lai, my own sense of self-worth. While I waited for my receipt, I noticed a young mother standing at the far end of the counter. Her coat was thin, and her eyes were fixed on the floor as she tried to negotiate the sale of her wedding ring for grocery money. I saw the desperation in the set of her shoulders, a weight I knew all too well. Without a word, I walked over to the shopkeeper and paid the woman's principal and interest in full. I didn't stay for the tears or the thank yous. I slipped out the door before she could even look up. True kindness is a gift given in the shadows, needing no light to be real. I haven't been forgotten. I've been reborn in the service of those who actually need it. An hour later, I was standing at the edge of the Lake Michigan waterfront. The ice floes ground against the concrete shore with a sound like breaking glass, a cinematic symphony of winter. I checked my phone one last time. There were dozens of frantic, screaming voicemails from Diane and Casey, followed by a dry legal notice from the Cook County Jail regarding Lyle's bail hearing. I didn't delete them in anger. I simply archived them as evidence of a life I no longer inhabited. To forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover that the prisoner was you. I didn't hate them anymore. Hatred is a bond, a heavy chain that keeps you anchored to the past, and I wanted only the freedom of a stranger. I scrolled through a local news feed and saw a snippet about the Blackstone blackout and the sudden collapse of the Henderson reputation. I felt no joy in their misery, only a quiet, hollow sadness for the people who chose mirrors over windows. A man who builds his house on a foundation of pride should not complain when the wind reveals the sand. They had lived for the shadow for so long that they had forgotten the substance. I looked at the watch, wound the stem until I felt the tension, and realized my time in Chicago had reached its final second. The best way to honor your past is to outgrow it. The transition to O'Hare International Airport was a blur of gray slush and orange streetlights. I stood at the gate for a one-way flight to San Francisco, my bags packed with only the things that mattered. As I waited, an email notification chimed on my phone. It was the official hire letter for the senior director position at the California shipping terminal. My scruffy expertise and my years of 18-hour shifts at the docks had finally found a place that valued substance over style. I smiled, a real, unburdened smile that reached my eyes. I didn't realize it then, but that moment changed everything. I was finally moving toward a horizon I had built for myself. A final text came through from my lawyer. The order of protection was finalized, and the financial severance documents were filed with the court. I was legally and financially dead to the Hendersons. They could no longer use my name, my credit, or my soul to fund their delusions. I felt a surge of quiet power, a lightness in my chest I hadn't felt since I was a child. I realized that freedom isn't the ability to do anything you want. It's the strength to say no to what you don't deserve. I looked at the $20 bill Diane had given me, the diner money. I left it on the terminal seat for someone else to find. I didn't need their charity, and I didn't need their guilt. As I boarded the plane, the flight attendant greeted me with a warm, genuine smile. She didn't see a mess or a scruffy girl. She saw a woman traveling with purpose. I took my seat and watched the Chicago skyline shrink beneath the clouds, a grid of lights that used to be my cage. I pulled out a photo of my new office overlooking the Pacific, a place where the air was fresh and the future was wide open. I am Alana, and I am finally the architect of my own destiny. I sat back and closed my eyes, the hum of the engines a lullaby for a life that was just beginning. Looking back now, I understand that you can't warm a house where they always saw you as a cold wind. But out here, above the clouds, the sun is always shining. I know many of you have been there, betrayed by the ones meant to love you, used until you felt hollow. Have you ever lived something like this? Have you ever had to walk away to find the ground beneath your feet? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every one of them, because I know that sometimes the only way to heal is to know you aren't walking alone. We are the ones who built the fires, and now we are the ones who get to stay warm.